y que dicen las autoridades de Israel que no debe existir el Estado palestino, que debe desaparecer porque es una amenaza para Israel. Si nos vamos con esa filosofía, habría que pedir la desaparición del Estado de la United States. El primero que debería desaparecer es ese Estado, que es el mayor criminal que tiene la humanidad. Y no solamente para andar asesinando a los pueblos, ocupando países como ha pasado aquí en Nicaragua.
International law very clearly states that the Palestinian people have the right to their own state. However, the Israeli government has done everything it can to prevent the Palestinians from having a state. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu boasted of preventing a Palestinian state from being created for decades. Historian Rashid Khalidi at Columbia University published a book titled Brokers of Deceit that explains how the US government has supported Israel in this process and how Washington has sabotaged international agreements and prevented the recognition of a Palestinian state at the United Nations. In April, the US government vetoed a Security Council resolution that called to recognize Palestine as a UN member state. The vast majority of the member states in the General Assembly voted to recognize Palestine, but the United States is literally the only obstacle on earth, the only country that has the power to and is using that power to block the recognition of Palestine. Despite that, 145 of the 193 UN member states have already established formal diplomatic relations with the state of Palestine. And if you look at a map of the countries that recognize Palestine, it's basically all of the global south and the east, and there are just a few Western countries that refuse to recognize Palestine. So in other words, it's the West versus the rest. So the revolutionary Sandinista government in Nicaragua has made a proposal. If the US and Israel refuse to allow the creation of a Palestinian state, then the US should not have a state. Why does the US have a right to exist if Palestine does not have a right to exist? This is the question that was asked by Nicaragua's president Daniel Ortega, who is the leader of the Sandinista Revolution. In a speech, President Daniel Ortega accused Israel of the crime of genocide. I don't say that because this gets pushed down in the algorithm. It only gets a small fraction of the views of my other videos. And then he talks about how the US and European governments and NATO are arming Israel as it carries out these mass atrocities, and how the US government has carried out similar crimes against the people of Latin America, invading and occupying countries for many decades. Here is this clip.
Vemos también cómo los imperialistas se ensañan en un pueblo que, por acuerdos en los organismos internacionales, en Naciones Unidas, tiene derecho a ser un Estado, el Estado palestino, de un pueblo que está siendo sometido al genocidio, donde los niños están siendo asesinados todos los días, donde los jóvenes están siendo asesinados todos los días, y gobiernos europeos, el gobierno de Estados Unidos, reunidos en la OTAN, deciden todos los días darle cada vez más armas para que se sigan bombardeando al pueblo palestino. Y lo dicen claramente los gobernantes del Estado de Israel, que quieren que desaparezca el Estado palestino. Lo dicen sin ninguna vergüenza. La ley manda, Fue acuerdo de Naciones Unidas firmado por todos los países del mundo entonces que había que crear dos estados, el Estado de Israel y el Estado palestino. ¿Y qué dicen las autoridades de Israel? Que no debe existir el Estado palestino, que debe desaparecer porque es una amenaza para Israel. Si nos vamos con esa filosofía, habría que pedir la desaparición del Estado de la United States. El primero que debería desaparecer es ese Estado, que es el mayor criminal que tiene la humanidad. Y no solamente para andar asesinando a los pueblos, ocupando países como ha pasado aquí en Nicaragua, invadida por los yanquis.
Now, President Ortega was the leader of a revolution that overthrew a US-backed right-wing dictatorship who brutalized the people of Nicaragua for decades. But despite the fact that the US government has carried out so many crimes against the people of Nicaragua, he made it very clear that his problem is not with the people of the United States. President Ortega said, "I have nothing against the North American people, but rather against the US government, which does not represent the North American people." He pointed out that the US government and US politicians only represent rich elites, the military-industrial complex, and big corporations. Here's this clip.
Como no puedo hablar mal del pueblo norteamericano. O sea, los criminales son los que están gobernando, los que tienen el poder militar, los que tienen el poder económico. Esos son los criminales. Los que armaron a Somoza aquí, los que organizaron esa guardia genocida con la que se tuvo que luchar y que representan a los presidentes norteamericanos, no son más que puestos ahí por cualquiera de los partidos para servirle a la industria militar. Cuanto más guerra, más negocio para la industria militar, para servirle a las grandes empresas norteamericanas. Es decir, no está ni para servirle al pueblo norteamericano, sino para enriquecer a los más ricos en los Estados Unidos.
Now, as Israel brutally bombs Gaza with US weapons, Nicaragua has not only supported Palestine politically, but Nicaragua has also joined South Africa in the case in the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of the G-side crime. And Nicaragua extended the case and also accused Germany and European countries, along with the United States, of being complicit in Israel's crimes by sending more and more weapons to Israel. 66% of the foreign weapon supplies to Israel have come from the US, but Germany has provided 30% of the foreign weapon shipments to Israel, and Italy has provided 5%. Now, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, did not rule in favor of Nicaragua in this case. It said that the case that South Africa presented against Israel over its crimes against Palestinians is still ongoing, and therefore the court, which is known as The Hague because it's located in The Hague in the Netherlands, The Hague ruled that Germany does not have to immediately stop sending weapons to Israel, which is of course ridiculous, because in January, the ICJ ruled that Israel had to stop killing Palestinians because it could be violating the convention on G side. But Israel completely ignored that ruling and continued bombing Gaza, killing large numbers of civilians. Then in May, the ICJ issued another ruling that ordered Israel to, quote, immediately halt its military offensive in Rafah, which is a city in Gaza where roughly 1 million Palestinians were concentrated and gathered, and Israel was attacking them. And once again, Israel ignored this ruling by The Hague, and the US continued sending Israel weapons. And then on the 19th of July, which is also the anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution in Nicaragua, but on that date, the ICJ issued a third ruling, and it stated very clearly that Israel's occupation of not only the Palestinian West Bank, but also Gaza is completely illegal, that Israel must end its occupation, quote, as rapidly as possible. The ICJ ordered all Israeli settlers to leave. It ordered Israel to pay reparations to the Palestinian people. And importantly, The Hague said that foreign states, that is the United States and European countries, must not aid Israel in its illegal occupation of Palestinian territory and its crimes against the Palestinian people. And once again, Israel and its Western sponsors are blatantly ignoring this third ruling in 1 year from the ICJ. But honestly, we cannot be surprised too much because, as the people of Nicaragua know, the United States is, objectively speaking, a rogue state that has ignored international law, blatantly violated international law for many decades. Because, as Nicaragua points out every single year, in 1986, the International Court of Justice ruled that the United States had violated international law in the war, the brutal war that it waged against Nicaragua's revolutionary Sandinista government in the 1980s, when the Ronald Reagan administration and the CIA armed and trained the Contras, who were far-right extremists who burnt down schools and hospitals and killed large numbers of civilians. And the CIA also put mines in Nicaragua's ports and attacked Nicaraguan civilian infrastructure. And the ICJ said very clearly that the US must pay billions of dollars of reparations to Nicaragua, and the US completely ignored it and still today refuses to abide by this ruling from the ICJ at The Hague, which is the top UN legal authority. So here we can see very clearly that the US talks about the so-called rules-based international order, while the US and its allies and proxies violate international law every single day, carrying out these horrific atrocities all around the world. And meanwhile, revolutionary movements in the global south, like the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, like the Palestinian movement, they have a lot in common in their shared struggle against Western imperialism and neocolonialism. In the 1970s, the people of Nicaragua took up arms against a right-wing family dictatorship run by the Somoza dynasty that brutally controlled Nicaragua, that governed it with an iron fist, overseeing one of the poorest countries in the world with very high rates of illiteracy and infant mortality. And in 1979, the revolutionary socialist guerrillas in the Sandinista National Liberation Front, the FSLN, overthrew the US-backed right-wing Somoza dictatorship and created a new revolutionary government. They had been inspired by the Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, who overthrew another US-backed right-wing dictatorship in Cuba in 1959, 20 years before. Of course, the US government has a long history of propping up right-wing corrupt dictatorships across Latin America, and the US has invaded and occupied many countries in Latin America, including Nicaragua, which was invaded by the US military 3 times. And the US troops who were occupying Nicaragua in the 1920s and 30s were forced out by the revolutionary general Augusto Sandino, who inspired the creation of the Sandinista Front, which is of course named after Sandino. This year, 2024, on the 19th of July, Nicaragua celebrated the 45th anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution, and the Nicaraguan government invited as a guest of honor the Palestinian revolutionary Leila Khaled, who had been a guerrilla and who actually had fought alongside the Sandinistas alongside famous Nicaraguan revolutionaries like Patrick Argüello. And Leila Khaled delivered a fiery speech at the anniversary of the revolution in Managua. She spoke in Arabic with translation into Spanish, so I'll translate some of the key points of her speech into English. Leila Khaled said that she was proud that the Nicaraguan people had chosen, quote, a leadership that has fought against imperialism, colonialism, that has triumphed and continues to triumph in the path toward development. She thanked Nicaragua for always supporting the Palestinian people and said, quote, I am proud of this leadership, proud of my people, proud of the leadership that has denounced the killers of children and babies before the International Court of Justice, with Germany giving its support to the killers of children and babies. And she said, Gaza needs help. Gaza is hungry. Gaza does not have anything. No food, no lights, no electricity, no water. Gaza has nothing today. Khaled continued saying that, quote, we have learned from you all victory, revolution, and resistance that we have in common. She said, we share a common enemy, Israel and the US imperialism. And she said, in this shared fight, it gives us strength and courage to continue resistance because you are with us and we are going to win as you all won 45 years ago. Now, Leila Khaled is one of the leaders of a revolutionary socialist Palestinian group called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. And on the 19th of July, the PFLP published a statement honoring the Sandinista Revolution. And they wrote that the people of Nicaragua and the people of Palestine have, quote, shared goals against imperialism, the enemy of the peoples, and the enemy of humanity. And the PFLP noted that, quote, the US and its imperialist policy have failed in many countries. They have not been able to impose their colonialist project in West Asia and Latin America. So here, once again, we can see how the PFLP in Palestine, the Sandinista Front in Nicaragua, other revolutionary movements in the Global South, despite their cultural differences, they have a lot in common politically in their shared struggle against Western imperialism. Now, Nicaragua is a worldwide symbol of the national liberation struggles in the Global South that took place in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, with revolutions in places like Algeria and Congo and Ghana and Indonesia and Egypt and Korea and Vietnam and Cuba and, of course, Nicaragua. But one difference is that many of those Global South national liberation struggles, the revolutionary governments were overthrown in US-backed coups, or they lost power, their leaders were assassinated by the CIA. And in the case of Nicaragua in the 1980s, the CIA backed the far-right paramilitary group, the Contras, who burned down schools and hospitals and killed large numbers of civilians, trying to overthrow the Sandinistas. And they briefly succeeded in the neoliberal period in the 1990s and the early 2000s, until the Sandinistas came back to power in 2007. And since then, the Sandinista Revolution has been in its new phase, the second phase. But throughout all of this time, for decades, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua have always supported the Palestinian struggle against US-backed Israeli colonialism. They have always supported other national liberation struggles in the Global South against imperialism and against neocolonialism, in alliance, of course, with Cuba and with Venezuela, and the Bolivarian Revolution that was launched by President Hugo Chavez in 1999, 20 years after the Sandinista Revolution in Venezuela. So the Sandinistas in Nicaragua have always been a great symbol of the Global South revolution against Western imperialism. And Palestine, of course, has also been a key symbol of Global South revolution against Western imperialism. So the Nicaraguan and Palestinian peoples share a lot in common. And in the past few months, Nicaragua has gone out of its way to do many things to honor the Palestinian people. Earlier, I mentioned that Nicaragua has supported the case in the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of the G crime and supporting Palestine. And furthermore, in February, the government of Nicaragua renamed the main road in the center of the capital, Managua, after Gaza. It is now called Gaza Road. And in February, the Nicaraguan government opened a new park in the center of the capital, Managua, which is called Palestine Park. And this is actually the second park that the Sandinistas have created in the capital, Managua, in support of Palestine. In 2016, the Sandinista government created another park that is called the Park of the State of Palestine. And the park features a big statue of the former Palestine Liberation Organization PLO leader Yasser Arafat, and a photo of President Ortega with Arafat. And it also honors the revolutionaries, both Palestinian and Nicaraguan revolutionaries, who died in the armed struggle against Western imperialism, and refers to them as, quote, martyrs in a shared struggle or in a common struggle. So these are symbols of the solidarity in the Global South with Palestine. Nicaragua does have a revolutionary leftist government that has been fighting against imperialism and neocolonialism for decades, but across the Global South, many other movements, many other countries, many other governments feel very similarly about the Palestinian cause against colonialism. And what this shows is that the global North, the West, only represents a small percentage of humanity, and they may continue supporting Israel, sending it billions of dollars of weapons, but they long, long ago lost the hearts and minds of the vast majority of humanity. I mean, they never actually had the hearts and minds of the vast majority of humanity. They were the colonizers, the Western capitalist countries, the rich, advanced economies. They colonized the vast majority of the world, and Israel represents an extension of that attempt, that vain colonial project, an attempt to control the entire world and steal the natural resources and land of the global majority. But they're failing. And more, the Global South is standing up against Western imperialism, as we can see with the very noble example of Nicaragua and Palestine. I'm going to conclude here. I'm Ben Norton. This is Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share this, and I will be back soon. See you all next time.